Welcome, Elise, to the Essentially You podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, actually. I'm in the corner of my bedroom, which is where I like to be. And I'm in the book. My book has been out for 2 weeks. And it's
Today,
been
right?
today. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's been a total dream. And it's funny to have an experience where I was very clear with myself. I made myself be clear with myself about what I wanted. And this is what I wanted. So I
Ooh,
know.
so how does it feel? How does it feel to get what you wanted, to get the book, to get to say what you wanted to say, to get to have the deep conversations, and to get this book out into the world, which goodness knows takes well over 2 years to get this book baby out in the world, way longer than making real babies. And
Yeah.
then it is so well received. It's the New York Times. You get the call. Like, how does that feel?
Funny because in many ways, it's felt this entire process has been, and I know faith is kind of a tricky word, and I don't mean it in sort of I'm not affiliated with any religion, and I don't sort of constrain myself by any belief system, but I have had a lot of faith in this project that there was a metaphysical container for this book that I was tapping into, that I was expressing or writing about things that women know and that live in us, sometimes just below the surface, sometimes on top of the surface. And that my gift is distillation and bringing together lots of different, interesting, disparate sources, and that I could sort of access some of this information for people or bring it out of the subconscious in a way that would be resonant. And not that I was sort of exposing anything new, almost on the contrary, saying these are all things that we know and have felt, and this is the system that unifies them, and this is where it came from. And that I could create the context around so many women's lived experiences. And so I've had a lot of faith in the project because I knew it would resonate. And I don't mean that. And it's funny because I write about pride. And it's my instinct, like it is for most other women I know, to deflect praise and to minimize everything that I've done. Oh, yeah. So for me to even say, like, I could feel the resonance of the book. I mean, I also, I feel like it was in some ways channeled. It's built on the collective wisdom of so many people, many, many, many women. Like the bibliography and the endnotes of this book are intense. It's a conversation across time with other thinkers. And so in that sense, like I spent so much time and energy building this web, and I knew that it would hold. And so in many ways, it's surprising, yes, because it's always surprising. Like none of this stuff, it's my first book. Like you cannot engineer this. You can't predict it. You can't control for it. What I thought would happen is that it would take a while, but that it would find its readers and be passed on in that way, women to women primarily, although I hope men read it as well. But it's just happened much faster and at a much like higher level than I thought. And that's a really exciting surprise.
Yeah, well, and more women are going to find it, and more women are going to be talking about it, and it's going to keep having that long tail that you just kind of imagined it would, that it would be continue to be in conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so on our best behavior, the second I saw the title, I was like, I got to have the book. I got to have the conversation. Like this is it. And it so connects into the work that I do of, I take care of women who, because they've been, operating in this good girl mentality and subconsciously, unknowingly. I think a lot of things that we do, we don't even realize we're doing it.
Totally.
And then they're sick.
Yeah.
So they're burned out. They've got chronic, health issues, and they're struggling with energy, and and that's kind of where that's where women come to me, and that pervasiveness of us just kind of running ourselves on the ground, and because of the seven deadly sins.
Mm-hmm.
That we don't even know that we're subscribing to per se.
Yes.
And so for you, and I know you've noticed it in yourself, in the life that you've lived, and having this beautiful career, and having children, and all the things, and kind of what was driving us for these things.
1,000%. I mean, you mentioned it, sort of, these things are in us and they run us without our conscious participation or without actively subscribing to these ideas. And I think about my life, and, I grew up in nature in Montana to liberal parents who are not patriarchal at all. I went to a school with no grades, where we sort of made found object art and jumped the irrigation ditch at lunch, like without a lot of structure and rules. I didn't grow up in any religion. And so for me, it was this, still feeling chased by perfectionistic tendencies, by not feeling good enough, by sort of always having a cattle prod at my own butt, driving me to do more and be more to other people. And so to recognize, like, okay, I'm a white woman of privilege, and I am still sort of, I don't have the emotional freedom that I feel like I should. I am still completely constrained by culture. And that was sort of the starting point for me. If I don't feel safe and secure, if I feel lashed by these ideas of not being good enough, not being thin enough, not being smart enough, all of the not enoughness that I think so many women share, then what was it in us, all of us? What is the sort of air that we're breathing, the water that we're swimming in? This, we hear a word like patriarchy, and I think many people roll their eyes, or they're like, I don't even know what that is, or it sounds like a boogeyman, and
or it's not really true.
Or it's not really true. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And then what I was finding too is I would look at this chasm between my experience of the world and my experience of many men in the world, and a lack of equity. And some of this is so multifactorial, like it has to do with race, class, like all of these are it's all far more complex than simply gender. We know that within sort of even, the pay gap. Single women, particularly white women, have pay parity with men. It's mothers, it's women of color, it's class, education, et cetera. So, but I recognize, like, I look at my life, I look at the men, I look at the male bosses I've had. I do not, yes, there are Harvey Weinsteins. Yes, there's terribly misogynistic men. Certainly, there are lawmakers who are full of hate. There's certainly those factors in our culture. But to me, it didn't explain what was happening for women and why there's such a gap between where we are and where we should be and where we want to be in terms of equitable representation, et cetera. And so I had to, and then you look at all the social studies, all the social science, you look at the 2016 election, you look at social science coming out of workplaces, and it's just evidence, not only of women voting against and working against their own interests, but working against each other. And I had to understand what that was. How have we internalized patriarchy? How have we internalized matriarchy in a way that is destroying ourselves and destroying each other? What are we policing in ourselves and then policing in each other that's a kind of violence? Because I couldn't find a lot of men specifically. Yes, men are privileged by patriarchy, of course, but I couldn't say like, oh, it's my husband. Oh, it's my boss.
It's definitely my husband. No, I'm just
I know my husband's like,
he would say that to me. He was like,
yeah.
gosh, Mariza, it's a conversation every week in my household.
Oh my God. Yeah. But so much of it is just like, a simple example is I'm married to a lovely guy, feminist. I'm the we're both income earners. I'm the primary breadwinner, and he's a very present father. He still doesn't do nearly the same amount as I do. And he, will point things out like, you have never watched more than 20 minutes of a movie with me. Can you just like sit without getting up to do something, or like get your computer or go do dishes? Like, I have that compulsion in me that to drive to do stuff. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. He doesn't have, as a man, the same internal programming that he should be ceaselessly doing for other people and taking care of these endless to-do lists. And that's what's animating so many women.
Yeah, the mental bandwidth.
Yeah.
The house just screaming at you, the things to always be doing. And just watching your partner over there just chilling, not a care in the world.
No one is, he doesn't have any internal judgment about his parenting or fear of people saying that he's a bad father. He's present. He's a great father. Whereas this idea of good mothers and stuff and whatnot is so pernicious.
As a good mother, it seems, in this world.
Yeah. It's impossible.
It's pretty crazy. It's an impossible feat. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm myself very lucky. My husband, Alex, who is in my company, is my COO. He will grab our son, who's here in the house with our nanny right now, at 3, depending on when we finish. I also have a solo episode I'm working on right now. And so it's really sweet but he's going to be out and about with my son, and he's going to get all the kudos in the world. And, that's how it's going to be. He's just the best dad.
The best dad.
Let's
ever. Just I'm always like, where is the trophy that I can burnish for you, Rob? I mean, he takes the kids to the store, and people are like, oh, this is so adorable. Meanwhile, no one has ever commented publicly on my parenting.
No, if anything, there's just silent judgment.
Yeah.
Shameful judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know in the beginning, kind of in a big part of the book, kind of one of the tenets is that patriarchy is systemic, and that's why it's so challenging. It's deeper than we really understand. And I know that you just dove into that just a little bit, but can you share a little bit more of what you discovered there and kind of how it's permeating in a lot of just all these constructs that create our society?
Yeah. I mean, so I wrote a chapter in the book, This Brief History of Patriarchy, which people have permission to skip.
You said to not, and I was like, saddle up.
That was my editor. Yeah. She wanted to sort of emotionally prepare people for the densest chapter in the book, which comes as chapter 1, but with the promise that it gets if you can get through that, if you can clear that hurdle, you're like, we'll sail through the rest of the book. So thank you for enjoying it. I would like everyone to read it, because I think we hear about something like patriarchy and we think, oh, it's just kind of always how it's been. Men are more powerful. They were the hunters. Women have always been sort of cave dwelling and scared. And so much emerging research, and we'll never know the full story. It's all myth making to some extent, but so much, as DNA evidence evolves and science evolves, and they look back at some of these sort of our prehistory, they're constantly redefining who we were. And so my premise, based on a lot of other people's scholarship, is that we were these affiliative partnership style societies where everyone worked communally to support life. It wouldn't have been maybe the easiest time to be alive. There was a minimal amount of hunting, a lot of foraging, a lot of gathering, some planting. Men and women both hunted. There were female warriors. There were female Vikings. Women have always, maybe not at the same rates, although I talk about this discovery in the Andes of these graves, 26 graves. This was in the New York Times a few years ago. Warriors, and they had always assumed that they were all men. And then when they examined them again with new scientific tools, they realized that 10 of the 26 were women. So I think we're just going to continually be challenged or confronted in this story that we've told. And you look at a settlement like Ketelhayuk in modern day Turkey, and the men and women were essentially the same size. They were eating the same diet. So men weren't getting a preferable amount of calories or better calories, which you do see in some settlements. They had the same amount of soot in their lungs. So they were spending the same amount of time in the kitchen, indoors. And so you think about where we are now and how much of that is, and we'll never know the answer to this question, but how much of it is nature versus culture? Are men significantly larger than women because that's just nature, or because we've bred that into us over time through culture and through a dominance-based, oppressive, patriarchal style of living, which has really been around for, I don't know, 8,000 years? Not that long in the span.
No, it hasn't been that long.
Yes.
It's only been, I think, like 8 to 10,000 years when things started to really, it shifted, right? The tide
shifted.
turned.
Yes. So we moved from this, and there are, this is happening at different times around the globe.
Places, yeah.
Yeah. But in the Judeo-Christian patriarchy that we know now, it's really changed. And what's amazing about this science of this is that there was this UCLA anthropologist named Maria Gimbutas, and she's been dead for a while, but she did a lot of incredible scholarship around these goddess figurines that were found where there weren't really male corollaries, but there were these sort of totems, these, they could have been an equivalent to a Barbie doll. They could have been birthing talismans. They could have been goddesses. She didn't make a ton of claims, but her work about sort of early matrilineal, there was not a matriarchy in the sense really ever of an oppressive female dominated culture.
I always hoped that there had been,
but it's more matrilineal. There were some matrilineal cultures,
right.
Like they were more
equality,
balanced.
Across the board. Like everyone had a role, and everyone's role was very important.
But it wasn't this like men are subservient, men are enslaved, men are property. That hasn't, as far as I know, existed, and nor would we want it to, right? So. But in her scholarship, which was sort of embraced in the 70s and 80s by a lot of feminist writers who maybe made some leaps in terms of there being sort of everything was a matriarchy, which isn't true. She was trashed, Gimbutas was. And one of her main theories was that around 8,000 years ago, I believe, I could be slightly off, but that there were these warring tribes that came down from the north, the Kurgans, that descended into sort of this fertile valley where Judeo-Christianity developed, and raped, pillaged, enslaved women and children, killed men. And that's where patriarchy and property first took root in that part of the world. And so she was mocked. She had passed by this point, but like just trashed by other academics, even though men had, of course, made sweeping arguments about our prehistory all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then in recent years, DNA evidence has shown that she was right, and that the DNA completely turned over, that the men had been killed, et cetera, and that it had been taken over by this Kurgan line, which is fascinating. And then you see sort of the creation first of just a patriarchy that's more Hammurabi's code. An adulterous woman will be stoned and drowned. An adulterous man will pay a, $10 fine. The stuff that doesn't feel that dissimilar from where we are today. And then we see monotheism, the destruction of the goddess, the dethroning, the sort of complete co-option of paganism, and, the goddess who, Adam and Eve is actually an ancient Sumerian tale of the goddess and a snake in the garden, which becomes sort of co-opted. And things really start to change, and it really starts to change for women, because not only are we subservient and classed as property, a very, along a spectrum from sort of veiled and quote unquote pure to, a woman who has many partners or one of levels of respectability. It starts to be paired with morality. And we start to have this sort of God the Father who's dictating
all of it.
The depravity of the woman, and the need to dominate and overcome the base desires of the body and the feminine.
And here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are. One of the things that as you were kind of pointing out, when before this major shift, that there was equality. And it's really fascinating how, even in today's modern time, obviously women are being subconsciously driven by these, but we are really wearing all the hats and doing all the roles today and really showing up in society. And I would just say, in the last couple hundred years, where mind you, we're not where we get to be. We're not getting paid the way we should be. We're not being honored as mothers. Where childcare is very challenging. There's a lot of struggles and there were a lot of obstacles in our way. But man, we are doing the deal. Like we are, running businesses and mothering our children and taking care of our communities and really trying to stand as equals. I mean, definitely doing the work.
Yes. Women are like boxers training at high altitude.
Yes.
And we've been outperforming men actually at school for a century. So this isn't a new innovation too. It's not like women have only just stumbled upon our innate intelligence. I think in some ways, your ability to endure in systems that are not built for you makes you incredibly strong. And so you look at sort of who's holding up democracy right now. It's Black women, right? Who are extra steps removed from power. And they are incredibly well-versed, unfortunately, in our sick society in how to survive and ideally thrive. And so you think about women, and then you think about sort of the other distinguishing factors in our birth. And then you think about sort of white men who have been in power for millennia, primarily, and sort of the levels of power within masculinity. And it's really not that our sympathy should be reserved for men, but I am definitely concerned because I think women know how to dream about a different future. We know how to work for it and we know how to build it. I really think that that's true. And I think that part of why I wanted to write this book is for us to be conscious of what's driving us internally around these ideas of goodness and starting to let those go as mediated by an external judge. We are good. Of course, we're good. And to sort of stop worrying, like, are people going to think I'm a good mother? Are people going to think the worst thing you can say about a woman is that she's bad person, uncaring, a bad mother. Men can do all sorts of things, commit crimes, et cetera. But if they still seem powerful, we still venerate them, right? Mm-hmm. So I think for women, it's this understanding what you were saying, our general excellence. We are very well equipped if we can learn how to get on side with each other, if we can learn how to take and share power, if we can make sure that this isn't some sort of messed up top-down BS like we saw with the suffragettes, but instead is sort of driven from a place of equity, nurturance, care, all of the qualities that we have. My hope is that men, and we can get into sort of the masculine and the feminine, but men are just like, oh man, they really need to learn how to let their feminine come up. They really need to learn how to be in a very different way, to be more feminine. I think women are very comfortable in their masculine and their feminine. And men have been told that they absolutely cannot be in their feminine because it makes them weak and womanly. And meanwhile, it's like they desperately need to like feel that energy of nurturance and care and creativity and listening and receptivity. And I don't know. I hope they can bridge it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's definitely the kind of the struggle that we're seeing play out. Because I think you're right. Women can they know how to be feminine and masculine. Although I will say that I know I was bred to be a very masculine woman. I was raised by a single mom who was really trying to survive in the 80s in a corporate world. And so we were really bred to, my sister and I, to just just survive, and like get it done. And so it was really an unlearning to not operate in a masculine and kind of a survival way. It's exhausting. over time. You can't maintain that forever. And it's obviously not healthy for a number of reasons.
Yes, 1,000%. I'm much more comfortable in my masculine too. And so learning how to be more in my feminine has not been easy at all, but essential, because only sort of in your feminine can you really receive nurturance and care and support, and not constantly be sort of in that throttled doing, structuring, organizing, directing, etc. mode.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that you're going to be you touch upon that in the book as well. And just like how we can, make it work, and how we can come to a place where we're creating from a place of not judging ourselves, not having shame. And I really kind of want to pivot into the 7 deadly sins. I grew up Catholic.
Okay, so you're well aware.
I'm well aware of these. I went to Catholic school.
But did you know they weren't in the Bible?
I had no idea. There's no, it's, they're not telling you that. This is the institution that, the Adam and Eve story had been reworked. So no, they weren't. I had no idea that
they're not gospel. Yeah. It's wild and people have sort of come at me on Instagram where they're like, this is anti-God and, Jesus. I'm like, these are not from Jesus. Like, learn your history. This is not Jesus. This is Pope Gregory the First in the 6th century. This is the desert monk in the 4th century.
It's co-opting. I'm like, that, that looks convenient. Let me just borrow that. Yeah,
exactly. It's amazing, like, where these stories come from too, and then how they just become what we run on, But anyway, go ahead. Do you want me to say what they are?
I would love for you to say what they are. I know them, but I would love for you to say what they are. And then I'd love to start with, if you're down to start with a couple of these, I would love to really dive into envy. I was really fascinated, regarding your conversation around what envy can really tell us about what we want and need, and how we can really explore that in a way that can honor us and really get us what we need, opposed to, this kind of negative driver.
Yeah. So I'll do the order that I write about them in the book. There's kind of no official order, but pride is sort of seen as the head sin by Pope Gregory and company. But anyway, they are sloth, envy, pride, greed, gluttony, lust, anger. And then when they were first written down by this desert monk in the 4th century, they were 8 thoughts. This is before they became the cardinal vices. And the 8th thought was sadness. And so I included that in the book as it was described by him as having a feminine soul. And I don't know why Pope Gregory didn't think it made this set, but I write about it as being lodged primarily in the minds of men as something to repress and deny. And that the primary symptom of that is toxic masculinity. When you sever men from their feelings, they become disconnected from life. So envy is near the front of the book because I write about it as the gateway sin. Envy shows us what we want, which is revolutionary in a culture that conditions women to believe that they should subjugate their wants to other people's needs. To want things as unseemly, bad, selfish. Maybe if there are resources left over, sure. But really it's not appropriate to prioritize what you want for your life over the needs of other people. And I was talking to psychotherapist Lori Gottlieb, who wrote an amazing book. Maybe you should talk to someone if you haven't read it. It's great. And she had this small aside in her book about how she tells clients to pay attention to their envy because it shows them what they want. And I was interviewing her many years ago, and I asked her about this because it felt like such a light bulb. And I asked her if it was gendered, and she said she didn't know, but that women are so much less comfortable with feelings that we think are bad, so that she would guess, yes, more common with women, but undiagnosed. And so started thinking about this idea of what we want and envy in women. And my theory is that because envy feels so bad, it seems so malicious and gross that we suppress it. The minute it starts to come up, we just shove it down and it comes out sideways. And so when we're sort of railing on that other school mom or that woman who drives us crazy, we don't recognize that it's envy. And so when we say things like, I don't like her, or she rubs me the wrong way, or who does she think she is? It's really because she's doing something that we want for ourselves or has something that we want for ourselves. And it's our soul's way of sort of knocking on the door and saying, pay attention to this. This is really important information. This woman is pushing on a dream you have for yourself, or she has a quality or that you want. It could be that she drives you crazy because she's so comfortable speaking up for herself, or having people's attention on her or her body. There's something in what she's doing. It might be her career. It might be
how she looks, or
how that she has kids.
Effortlessly takes care of her kids, and all
yes.
this, yes.
It could be any number of things. It's probably not the whole package. But when people irritate you, or torment you, to quote Richard Schwartz, there are your greatest mentors, these tormentors, and they are giving you information. Because as you'll also note, the same women don't drive your friends nuts in the same way. It's typically sort of this intimate one-to-one relationship where you kind of recognize that it's not logical. And this is not to say, I just want to be clear, like there are women in the culture pushing hateful legislation, harming people. Having an aversion for them or that behavior specifically is not jealousy.
Right.
Not envy.
That is your gut telling you that
is like saying,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very different than this sort of feeling of like,
reactive
bothers me.
Yeah.
Yes.
This reactive feeling, this kind of, it's your stuff. Something's coming up for you that is looking to be reviewed. In all the patients that I've taken care of over the years, asking women if they know what they need or want, or what even brings them joy. And so few women have ever known. No one's ever asked them, or they never sat down to think about it. Again, growing up in a Mexican Catholic family, you always sacrificed yourself. Like that was just the way it is. And guilt was currency in my household. You always being made to feel guilty for, putting yourselves first. I remember being called selfish growing up so many times. I couldn't even count, my head spun so much from being called that. And that was just the way that the women in my family thought of it. And so it's crazy to think that we can grow up and never even have a sense of what our needs and wants and desires are, and don't even have a process for exploring them, or even put ourselves first. I always ask women, I'm like, if you don't put yourself first, who's going to? Is somebody going to be like, oh, you know what? It doesn't look like you're putting yourself first today. Let me help you with that. Like, nobody.
No. And it's such a powerful tool. And what I love about the sins is they sort of all bump into each other, and thinking about this idea of needs and wants and not enough, and getting into greed, for example, and the way that so many of us think about money specifically as base and gross and not something that we should want or cultivate, and that money is for men and not for us. And even thinking about sort of needs, wants, not enough in that context, for me, was like a breakthrough moment. I had left my full-time job. This is in COVID. Everything was very uncertain. I was freaking out about not having enough. And I spoke to this woman who is one of my spiritual teachers. And she said, okay, well, what do you need? And what do you want? What is enough? And she wanted me to concretize it, to like actually articulate and define what that is. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, I don't know. I just don't have enough. And she said, people always come to me and they say, I don't have enough, and they don't know what that even means. And I promise you, the divine is very good at serving needs, but it is on you to articulate what those needs are. Less good at serving wants. Sometimes it happens, but she made me write it down. I made an Excel spreadsheet with tabs, and I wrote down all of my needs, my mortgage, paying for childcare, paying for Vicky paying for her health insurance for her and her husband, car payments, et cetera. Like all the stuff that defines our lives that we need, groceries, et cetera. And then, so that was amazing because I actually really, and I know a lot of people, but I feel like we sort of lost budgeting. I'm sure some people are really good at this, but I never learned the sort of that financial literacy of make a budget as everything sort of moved to credit, et cetera. So for me, it was an amazing experience to write it all down and be like, okay, that's what I need in order to meet my needs. And I can do that. I can see that and I can figure out, I can work backwards and figure this out. With my wants, it was really hard how much anxiety, shame came up for wanting anything. And I was like, okay, I want to take my kids to Montana, where I'm from, to ride horses and to ski. I want new ski boots. I want, and then to also in the same revelation be like, oh, there are all these things that I've been conditioned to think that I want that I don't want. I don't want a second home. I want to go on a couple trips. I don't want a fancy sports car. I don't want a closet full of handbags. There's so many things I don't care about at all that it was really clarifying and very peacemaking to get honest with myself. And then I did the same thing in terms of what I want for my career. Because again, I had never done it. I had never, ever done that.
I'm curious about the career path too, because I know that for so many women, the good girl path, being told to be a good girl, get the good grades, here's your trajectory, you got to go get married or whatever that may be. Did you find yourself following a path that you didn't even know you were following at any point?
Yes and no. So I always had a job, always, starting when I was 14, probably. I worked through college. I always had a job, always. There were a couple months after I graduated from college when the economy was sort of totally in the toilet, and in 2002 when I did not have a job, which was terrifying. And then I had always had a job, if not more than one. And I think it was like driven by that anxiety or lack of security or feelings of safety and scarcity that I always had at least one job and then always side hustle. So ghostwriting books, some consulting, like I never felt like I could relax unless I were sitting on a 3-legged stool, which definitely burnt me out and has been way too much, and a level of productivity that I haven't been able to sustain, which has been hard, but an essential part of getting a little wiser.
Yeah. And how has that healing been? It's the lesson I find I'm always learning.
Well, this book is the first experience that I've ever had of sort of being, yes, like you sell your book to an editor, a publisher, and then it goes out into the world, and then it exists and people buy it. And it takes years to earn out your advance. Many people don't ever earn out their advances. And then you start making some money. Yeah, exactly. Then you start making some money on the back end. But it's the first time I've ever created something where I'm like, oh, this then is like passive income potentially, or it could generate, I could speak, I don't know, I've been so entrained that my compensation needs to be directly tied to sort of the pain of creation.
Yeah.
This is like the first time I've ever had an experience like this, where it's like, I see how you can start to sort of like build a world where you make money without having to sort of create something every single time or twice. I write a newsletter twice a week. I host a podcast once a week. I mean, you're aware of the same sort of like transactional nature of your work, where you do something and then hope like more people will pay for a subscription or people will more advertisers will come or whatever it may be.
Yeah, the multiple buckets. And the intention of, that the content that we're creating, continues to support us down the road.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. So, but even still with that, I guess for me, and I think for so many women, like even with motherhood, like I'm going to come out of this, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get it to my team like I'm supposed to do. I'm going to go and work on the other thing before if my family comes home. And if I've got time, we just got home from a trip last night. I'm the person who unpacks us usually within 3 hours of being here. And we got home super late. So I didn't have a chance to do that. Like there is a endless list of things for me to do once I hit downstairs, that becomes household mom activities. That's not this business,
Yeah.
And so just, I was just curious about the pervasiveness of, like you said, money being tied to our productivity, our worth being tied to our productivity, and just the cat or the dog just chasing the tail all the time.
Yes. And it's so perverse for women and sort of anything that qualifies as the feminine, because as we know, and we learned in COVID, the care that we provide has zero value in terms of GDP, right? The way that we remunerate jobs of care, nurses, teachers, frontline workers is completely backwards, right? Like we literally die. Like we foundationally fail without those levers of care in our culture, the people who grow and pick and harvest our food. And yet we are remunerating, the CEO who lives down the street, who is only sort of pillaging and destroying the planet, not actually doing anything that makes our lives more tenable or better, right? We recognize we live in this upside down world. And I think that makes it hard. I think women are so connected to the planet. We cycle with the moon. We create. I mean, it's amazing what we do.
I'm mind blown.
Yeah, it's stunning. And so much of patriarchy has been about the suppression of the feminine, of matter, which etymologically means mother, of the baseness of all of this, that earth, that the planet is to be, corralled and used and mined and excavated. And so I think that women also with money, it's like we run into this wall of like, we can't pay our ecological credit card debt. This idea of more is pernicious. And then you have to remember, like, money inherently is an energy. It's just a current. And so it's sort of a little bit of a retraining around moving it from like, it's not, we can do great things with it. Women are really more philanthropic, more generous, we're better investors, we trade less, et cetera. So
we give back to our communities.
Yeah. And then recognizing that sort of this call to consumerism, which is pushed on women as the household CEO, and that it's our job to support the economy with our spending, and to be like, actually, no, I am only going to spend money on things that I care about, on like things that enhance my life. That's very powerful. I don't know if you feel this way too, but like in the work that I do create, asking people to pay me, for the newsletter, asking things that I would like shy away from, because so many of the things that women create, so many of the feminine creations, art, content, it's like, oh, of course that should be free. It should be free, like care should be free. And it's like, do you understand actually the emotional labor of caring and creating? And so I feel like
vulnerability of it.
Yeah. And part of our job is to like ask for remuneration and as some sort of rebalancing.
Well, and then us coming under fire for doing so as well.
Yeah. It's not easy, but it's like, it has to be done. It has to be modeled until it becomes sort of status quo. And that's it's very hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It's really hard. And yes, there's so much pushback, but that's part of the retraining, I think, that we all need to do.
Gosh, that question of, gosh, how do we start? how do we start the retraining? I mean, one, it's the awareness, it's the conversations that we're having right now. It's the boundary setting. It is the deciding, how many balls we really need to have in the air. It's deciding to give ourselves rest. It's really going against everything we've been told or everything that's kind of like kind of driving us. I find it to be so challenging. And I find it comes up for review all the time. It's like the lesson that we have to keep learning. For as much as I feel like I know this, man, I can find myself getting caught right back in the cycle of it because it's in everything that I live.
Yeah. I agree. It's really hard. It is exactly this. It's interrupting those conversations and voices in our head. It's recognizing that this isn't you. This is a cultural voice that's, extolling you to behave or pursue goodness at all costs. And then it's really, I think, starts to change when there is a willingness to misbehave, when there's a willingness or sort of allyship amongst women, particularly white women. I, argue that sort of the closer you are to sort of core patriarchal power, the more subscribed you are, the more sort of caught betwixt and between. And it's hard. I get it, because women are sort of like, well, this is my security and safety, and I don't know where else to go. But part of it is sort of leaning into the bravery of saying the truth out loud and pushing against these ideas of what it means to be good and what it means to be valorized solely for that goodness. And to say, no, actually, I'm going to let my anger come up. I'm going to express my needs. I'm going to assert boundaries. I'm going to go after what I want. I'm going to recognize my envy and process it and live with it and let it be information for me so that I can stand with other women, not against them. I think, we start to build a movement. We start to model for each other what's possible. And through that, sort of push it also against these ideas of scarcity. Oh, there's only room for one. Oh, because she has this, I can't have it too. Oh, that will never happen because nobody has ever done that. And I think the more that we misbehave for each other, the more hopeful I am that we can tell a different story in the future.
And Elise, do you find, as we're wrapping up, do you find that you're seeing that shift happen? I mean, I always tell everyone, I serve everyone by serving women. It's the work I'm here to do in the world. And I know that I'm serving their families, I'm serving their partners, I'm serving communities. And I've always been a crusader of women. I love women. I want to be supporting them. I want to be, celebrating. And the idea that women are pinned against each other and that we are beating each other up, and there's so much shame that's put on us that it's mind blowing to me. That I'm like, was this weaponized? Like, when we taught to do this? Because it doesn't work, and it works us in the opposite direction of what we're looking to gain. And so I don't know if this is something you go. Like I said, I've only gone through half the book. If this is something you dive deeper into, or if you see a shift here, because it's heartbreaking to see how often we bash each other.
I'm hopeful, in part because, I've been living alone with this book with my editor for a couple of years now, and to see it sort of start to be read and discussed, and the messages that I've received from women who feel like I'm sort of in their head, that we're the same person, that I'm giving voice to things that they've always felt but haven't known how to say or didn't recognize were connected. I think that, honestly, as mentioned, like, women are amazing, as you know, and that if we start to break these spells, and I think it's within our power. Like, I don't think that anyone has to sort of grant us power from this system. I think it's just a process of like removing all of these internal blocks so that we can step forward and support each other, push each other forward. I think it starts to change dramatically. I really do. I have a lot of, I mean, and you can say, like, you look at sort of women who are sort of operating outside of patriarchy in that way, and you look at what they've already managed to lead and achieve. And she's obviously like exemplary on so many levels. So maybe she's not an accessible sort of like every woman. She even writes like novels. I mean, she's amazing, but
I'm just always so inspired.
But I think
by the mountains she moves.
Yeah, the mountains she moves. And so you think about that starting to scale, and she's obviously not the only one. And that's pretty thrilling to me to think about what it actually looks like if we all get on the same side. And not against men, bringing men into the next, and men too. We need men, but like moving everyone, evolving into sort of the next era
of balance. Who we all get to be, of that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love it. And I love this book so much. I'm so excited to continue to devour it. And I just want, I think a big part outside of the conversations and listening to this is to have beautiful resources like this just gorgeous book that I know you spent so much time on and dove into the research and so beautifully curated it.
Thank you.
I know there are more books in your future. That is for sure. Well, Elise, thank you so much, Elise.
Thank you for having me, and good luck with everything that you have to do. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Oh, no worries. It is what it is.
Okay. Bye.